Everybody, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions, and welcome once again to the Kansas Deep Dive. This time around, this is the third installment, and we have a new co-host. Jeff Wagner helped me out on the first couple episodes. Now I'm joined by Mr. Steve Fleck. You'll recognize him from Sea of Tranquility. And Steve, thank you for sitting in on this.
Oh yeah, my pleasure, Tim. As we were discussing, I just get absolutely abhor Kansas. So I mean, this is so
Yeah,
difficult for me.
yeah. How could I do this to you, right?
Right.
Uh, we are discussing the third album from Kansas, the second album released in '75. This is when bands were just pumping them out. Masque, and this very, very interesting cover called. I love the fact that the painting is called Water, and yet water is the one element you do not see. It's everything but water. And the more you look at it, the more you realize that everything in this picture is made up of some sort of sea life.
Correct. Yep.
So yeah,
That's
things
a
are not as they seem. Thus the title, right?
yep.
And so this album, "Song for America" is generally considered to be, one of the best, especially of the early period. Masque, how does Masque sit in that Kansas catalog?
I'll start off by just talking about that cover, and I love the fact that you had the vinyl there to show. I'm an original vinyl owner of all these. I can remember when I bought every Kansas album, or I was young enough where my parents might have bought it for me. So that's where we're going back. Mask is, or Mosque, I should say, is probably top three, if not top two for me. I can't say enough about it. Obviously, I'm big into all those early Kansas albums, but Masque is just right up there. It's to me, I like I think maybe CBS Epic was trying to possibly pick up some radio airplay with some shorter tunes, hence the opener. And I just really love those attempts, and I think they just add to the overall quality of that album.
Yeah, I don't have any problem at all with, we'll be getting into that. And of course, I have to show the variant. Looks a little bit different in this form.
Whew.
Took a couple of liberties with the coloring. And this is it's been scraped or something. That's not part of the artwork. But yeah. And they did this kind of the same thing with the cassette. This is a very, very old cassette, an old US cassette. And there's even a sticker on the side. Now it's pretty faded, but I think it's safe to say it says Kansas, and there's the Kirshner logo, and that's what it looks like
Nice.
on the side there. But the first time I heard it was when I was just in the process of getting the whole catalog. I got into them 92, 93 and picked
Yep.
up this CD. So produced once again by Jeff Glixman. I mean, he was like their guy. And yeah, you had mentioned that there might have been a little bit of pressure for a more commercial sound, and the opening track, "It Takes a Woman's Love to Make a Man," that was their sort of stab at a radio song. And I think it's a fine song. I mean, like you said, I don't look at it as taking away from their sound. I look at it as adding to it. Here's another piece of what we can do. So um that's a Steve Walsh solo number. Is there something significant about that, the fact that's a Steve song and say not a Carrie song?
Probably. Steve always wrote a bit more accessibly when it comes to mostly lyrics, and probably music. I say probably, but not always, because Steve Walsh could put out some really, really ripped up prog, as we know from talking about some of the stuff on Monolith for your
Exactly. Yeah.
publication. So, I mean, Steve is a writer, phenomenal. I love a lot of his tunes. This particular song is very Steve Walsh. You can hear that piano organ mix all over the place, which he is a very unique organ player. The more I listen, the more I appreciate him as an organ player. He's kind of underrated because there's Rick Wakeman, there's all of these great famous keyboard players, but Steve Walsh was just a ripping organ player with a very, very individual kind of style. Great to hear that opening kind of power chord, which I, love about Kansas, always did. I love their heavy guitars. And it's a nice melody, and it's not overly commercial to the point where, I guess the power ballad hadn't quite been invented yet, or if it was, we didn't know what it was. So that wasn't the sure way to radio back then, but a nice upbeat song, little sax solo, really, really dig it.
Yeah, the sax solo changes it up a little bit too. And something I never really thought about before, Steve, but I listened to this song and the harmonies and the chorus, and it's not unlike something that would have appeared in the first Boston album a year later.
You know,
Especially at the end where it goes into double time. It's kind of like the closer on the first Boston album, Let Me Take You Home Tonight, how it goes into double time.
yeah, that's
Who
an
knows? I
interesting
mean,
observation.
these
Yeah.
guys were influential, and not everybody cops to them as an influence.
Absolutely true. Yeah, I never even thought of that, but as you bring it up, it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah. So then, very quickly we get into Kerry Livgren territory. Although Steve Walsh is a co-write, but a very philosophical 2 cents worth. This one, actually, you know what? These first two songs, and I talk about this. The first time I heard these was I bought this cassette at a truck stop, and it wasn't an actual album. It was one of those record company, let's throw these out really cheap, put a cheap cover on them.
Yeah.
And I was just getting into Kansas, and this cassette was called Carry On. It had a map on the cover with Carry On written in lipstick, and it had an old photo of the band. It had
Hmm.
8 songs on it. It was the kind of thing where you go in and pay for your gas. There'd be a carousel of tapes, and they wouldn't always be actual albums. They'd be a lot of really cheap looking record company things, truck stop tapes, I call them. It had
Okay.
8 songs on it, and it was like $5, so I bought it. It
Nice.
started with Carry On, and it ended with Dust in the Wind. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll have those two for now. And it was actually a pretty good primer, but it actually had both Takes a Woman's Love and 2 cents worth on it. So the first time I heard these songs, they didn't come to me in their intended song order, but I've always liked them because I go back quite a ways with these two, more than
Yeah.
anything else on this album, actually. But two
Interesting.
cents worth. What's your 2 cents worth on 2 cents worth?
Another one of those Livgren blues style tunes. He would, um, I think, let's see, I'm looking back at previous albums. Those blues songs were not necessarily Carrie's, if I'm correct. Lonely Street was Steve Walsh, I think. And some of the rockabilly stuff on the first album, I believe, was also some Walsh, and I believe a cover of a
Yeah,
JJ
bringing
Cale
it
song.
back. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
bringing it
Then
back.
Down the Road was a collaboration. I don't.
Was a collaboration? Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So this is you would hear more of this style later on when they reunited for Somewhere to Elsewhere. A couple of those songs kind of follow this mold, but this is the first one of its kind, the first one of its style that to my knowledge, that appeared on a Kansas album, and I like it. It may be my least favorite on the album. It may be a bit out of place, but I think on its own, it's a nice kind of moving. There's some conga in there. I believe that's Steve Walsh playing it. I like the lyrics. Again, Kerry Livgren writing lyrics. I'm assuming he wrote the lyrics. It sounds like it could be him. You can't really go wrong. A little bit different, little bit, of a change up for them. So I salute them for that. Like I said, not my favorite song on the album, but I'm not gonna, skip it. I mean,
yeah.
it's
I mean,
a
you're
good
the
song.
best albums. Something has to come in at the bottom. Doesn't
Yeah,
mean it's yeah. And
not bad
they've
at
done
all.
this song in recent years. It's on one of those last two live albums they put out, and Ronnie Platt sounds perfectly fine
Wow.
singing this one. So it's great to, when they. I like the fact that Kansas isn't scared of anything from their catalog now. They'll play
Yeah.
something from every era. It doesn't matter if it's the Steve Morse era or if it's something from Monolith or something from the newer albums. And yeah, they sound like Carrie lyrics, very sort of pontificating lyrics, but Steve's delivery of them, I really like, I know that I'm here till the end. What a long time. Like, I really, really like that. It seems thrown together, but these guys were deep they had, I'm sure they had just as much fun as any other rock band. They were deep, deep thinkers, all of them, not just Carrie. Carrie may
Absolutely.
have had the biggest collection of books, but
Yeah.
they were all
Yeah.
pretty smart guys.
Yeah.
So now, uh, and Kansas kind of would do this. They wouldn't start right off with a prog epic. They'd give you kind of maybe straightforward songs, but that's all out the window by track three, and it's one of their absolute staple prog songs. It's kind of I think it's a set list staple. Icarus, Born on Wings of Steel. I mean, this one it holds up after multiple listens as just one of their finest compositions.
Agree there. I mean, I when I first heard it, I had the in the refrain,
Yeah.
that was my hook. Obviously, I'm a guitarist. I like the heavier side. I mean, I like all the facets to the band. That's the kind of thing that really would draw me in, or initially. And I thought, wow, what a catchy riff! And it's just one chord. It's just the way that I believe it's just an E5, and just the way they're kind of raking on it with the pick, and between the syncopation of Phil's drums, just drew me right in. And then of course, then you have a wonderful verse, an amazing chorus, a great outro, and then try and put it all together with these mythical lyrics. Definitely one of their, I would say, I mean, there's obviously some great epics on their first two albums, and this one, in whatever it was, 6 minutes, 6:30, I'm not sure, is every bit what those were, and maybe a little bit more. The stop before the Floating on the Clouds of Amber section, where you're just hearing keyboards, is about as dramatic as you can get. This song just, again, like you, multiple listens, took me a while to actually digest it. I just knew that I loved every note of it.
Yeah, there's a reason why it's a beloved song. 606. The CD
Okay.
doesn't tell me. I looked. 606.
Thanks.
And
Yeah.
and yet they have this ability to write these long songs that don't feel like long songs, because all the parts they're just so well written and put together.
That's what
And
I've always said. Yeah, interesting point. I've said the same thing. They don't feel like that.
yeah, they don't feel like a chore to listen to. Um, all the World, really nice. It's a nice collaboration between Steve and Robbie Steinhardt. Um, a little, I don't want to say poppier, but there's something this there's something about this song that basically kind of, it's a tug at the heartstrings kind of thing.
I personally really love All the World. No surprise there. Love the melody. I thought it was just a really nice kind of switch of gears after, you've heard like a very upbeat opening tune. You've heard a blues tune. You've heard like this epic 6 minute prog tune, which, seems short but it covers all this ground. It's very dramatic. And then All the World is just this sweet melody with, I believe, just the piano and then the violin. And first, let's see, is that his first lead vocal on this album? It may
I
be.
think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it must be. Yeah.
I'm just, and I love Steinhardt's voice.
Yeah.
And this is a awesome mix of, like, I just think of a shorter song which I can compare it to, and one that I equally love is "Thank You" by Led Zeppelin, off Led Zeppelin 2. And
Yeah. Yeah.
go figure.
Nice.
But
Yeah. Cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the vibe I get, but in a different way. But it's
Yeah.
got those very stop sweet sections, beautiful melody, and then it does kick up into gear, and you get some aggression, you get some instrumentation. Um, uh, just always loved the song, and I just love the dramatics of the song, and just a great collaboration between those two.
I hear a little Beatles in this one too, with the violin chugs and the.
Yeah, you could, and you know what? I mean, I think even just the name, All the World,
Yeah.
kind of, echoes a little Beatles. They were influenced by them. Who wasn't in that age group?
Yeah.
You can pretty much figure. Yeah, I love the track, really do.
And it's interesting. That's the side one closer. So it's almost like they wind you down, but you flip side two over and like another great riff, Child of Innocence, and it's one of the heaviest songs on the album.
Oh yeah.
Fantastic. And a great vocal from Robbie. Aggressive.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the, I like to call it the precursor to Lightning's Hand, you know, which
Yeah.
we'll get to. But this to me, when I heard this was unlike anything I'd really ever heard. Because it's, you know, Steinhardt's, like you said, he is, I picture him like my brother and I, when listening to these things, especially Lightning's Hand, when you hear the lightning sound effect. But you know, we didn't picture a guy sitting in a studio, even with the bizarre look that he had, with a big beard and the long hair, you know, and the piercing eyes, with a violin. We pictured him up the top of some mountain with like clouds floating over him, just like pontificating these lyrics, you know, while he's singing Child of Innocence. Like there was just this whole drama thing that went on when a song like that was you know recorded, and how it came out. And that is it's got everything. It's got, you know, change of time signatures, it's got change of keys, it's got ripping solos, it's got amazing like you know otherworldly kind of lyrics, and it just really goes, and it switches. I'm going to say this one is probably what, under 5 minutes maybe.
Child of
um
Innocence is 4:37. Yeah.
yeah, and then so in that running time, I mean, you got, you know, just a great trip. You know, you start here, you go there, you end there. This is a song that, you know, I'm not plugging anything, but I just decided, because I've loved it so much over the years. I'm a musician and I record. I decided to do a cover version of this song, and I was able to appreciate the intricacies like I never had before. And it, you know, this really understated here throughout this album and the other albums is Dave Hope as a bass player. Very
Yeah.
Chris Squire, very underrated melodic bass, kind of a nice big sound, but not too in your face, but always there, moving, melodic. Yeah, but just learning the bass track for this song, and everything else that goes along with it was,
And
you
Steve
know,
Walsh's vocals in the chorus are just blistering, like paint peeling.
oh, yeah, and you know that two-part harmony, and I think that's what they did on the recording. Um, Worked out perfectly live because they didn't really over embellish it. I think it was maybe one, maybe each of them double tracked, and then but they didn't have all that many tracks to work with, probably 26 at the time, or
Yeah.
24. But it worked equally well live because that was a blistering live song, and you know those two voices, Walsh and Steinhardt, really blended and made it feel like there was probably, you know, six guys singing, and it really was just the two of them.
Yeah. I love watching that old footage of them. What I think on the Don Kirshner's rock concert, you know, famously, where there was actually nobody in the audience. It was just, you know,
Yeah,
they panned around to the audience, but you know, Steve Walsh playing keyboard and hitting all those notes effortlessly, like he could do it in his sleep. I mean, he was so amazing, and doesn't get enough credit. And
yep.
then they change it up again. It's another kind of poppy one with "It's You." What do you think of this one?
I really like this one. It's like you said, it's a nice little change up. Shows off his you know, incredible piano skills. Um, this is the one that has the, well, most Kansas songs have some form of triplets, but right,
Yeah.
and yeah, that would be a kind of a pattern that Steve Walsh would bring along, and we'll touch on it with Questions of My Childhood from Left Overture. But that kind of like keyboard organ mix with the triplets and or sextuplets is a very that's a kind of a blueprint for a lot of what you'll hear with Kansas arrangements. And yeah, I really like It's You. Short, sweet, not pompous, just fun to listen to.
Yeah, and it's almost sounds. It reminds me of you know. Sometimes I think that vocalists, songwriters, or whatever, they'll say, "I liked that one. What if I wrote another one like that?" Because this to me feels like sort of a sister song to "Away from You" from Monolith, because it's the same. It's a shuffle, uh, very similar. It's got those triplets in it too. Um, but then they decide they're going to end the album off with two epics. Um, a very different sort of speeds. Mysteries and Mayhem. This one is epic and goth and heavy in places. Like this is an amazing song.
Yeah, right there. I think that between obviously, well, I think any Kansas fan would tell you between Icarus and these two songs, which were originally one song, that's basically the best that there is on this album. And there's a lot of great material on this album.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mysteries and Mayhem is another. It comes from another planet, as far as I'm concerned. When I first heard it, again, I was probably 14, so very influential. It just blew my world away. I was like, how do these guys play like this? How does this guy, like, and then when I started seeing live clips and things on, like, on Don Kirshner, I would look at Steve Walsh and say, how does this guy sing like this and then play the organ at the same time like this? Like, blew me away. Equally, the guitar playing, Kerry Livgren and Rich, very different styles, very underrated. And I already mentioned Dave Hope. And I think, obviously we have discussed this before, Tim, Phil Ehart as being one of the best rock and roll drummers ever. Talk about underrated. And he's on full display, in Mysteries and Mayhem. I love the trade-off in vocals. I love how both of them are, aggressive and just, bring a different texture to, the kind of moods, when one goes with one verse and one goes with the other. And it's really one of those, kind of chill inducing type of, prog tunes, really driving. And like you said, dark at times, and
Really pulls you into the story. Like it's like it's like you're a nightmare. It's a nightmare. You're running and you're not getting anywhere.
yeah, I've tried to figure out, like, to your point, tried to figure out some of those lyrics and what it meant from my 14-year-old head. Obviously, took some time over the years, but it's like you said, nightmare. So what do you say about that? Just gotta switch gears for a minute.
Yeah.
Going outside. I don't want to confuse anybody in the house. So yeah, I mean, and then where do you go from there? Well, you go to the Pinnacle, which, if you notice, Mysteries of Mayhem fades out, and then
but it introduces the melody that would show up from the Pinnacle. And the Pinnacle is still an epic track, but it's not quite. It's like they let the foot off the gas a little bit as far as like power chords maybe, but it's still just as intense. It's a great closer.
Absolutely. And my information on this was that it was one track, and the record company was like, we don't really want this 17-minute song. But you can see where on the fade out, that was a studio trick probably. And it would have actually, I did something digitally and I made it one song again just to kind of restore it so I could have that listen. It works really well.
It's
but
about 13 minutes. Yeah, it's 13 minutes long. Like Mysteries and Mayhem's 4:19 and the Pinnacle is 9:33.
Yeah. Okay. So not that, considering
really not that long for a prog rock epic.
No, not that long.
Not close to the edge.
It's not. Or is it Tales from Topographic?
Yeah.
So those two together, just and I'm trying to think of the choruses on the Pinnacle. I mean, just grandiose to a fault. And I think we're going back to, a little bit of what we heard on Song for America, and we're just putting an exclamation, mark on it. Like here, we're kind of like driving this forward even more powerfully, in my opinion. The one thing I will say about Masque is, and it's my only criticism, but I think somewhere in between the first two albums, Masque, and then its follow-up, Left Overture, the engineering, even though they were all recorded, well, the second album through the next couple were recorded at Studio in the Country with the same producer and probably the same engineer. The engineering recording on Masque is, I find the drums to be a little demo-y as far as the sound goes, and the guitars to sound a little too practice ampy for me. And that's my only criticism, and it's a small criticism, but when you listen to the drums, especially on Left Overture, boy, we progressed. I mean, and the guitars.
So it's engineered by Lee Peterzell, assisted by Jimmy Stroud. I don't know those names.
I know they were all studio in the country and they were all Jeff Glicksman productions, but yeah, sometimes you'll find the engineers' names on the older albums who eventually become, producers in their own right.
Producers in their own right, and sometimes
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
Right.
But
And
yeah, I
that's
mean,
okay.
you can have the same, you can have the same producer, but if the engineer's different, it can make a huge difference in the sound. I mean, I was watching something. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was Sea of Tranquility, and Pete and Martin Popoff were talking about Ted Templeman's productions with Van Halen.
Yep.
When they sort of split, Ted Templeman produced David Lee Roth for a
Yep.
couple, projects, but Van Halen kept Don Landee as engineer. That made
Yep.
a difference with
Yeah.
Ted Templeman's productions. So yeah,
Yeah.
your engineer. I mean, you can be a really powerful producer, but if your engineer and if you don't have that producer engineer team, sometimes it makes a difference too. If you're just getting to work with someone one time.
Absolutely. And you have to look no further than the Beatles for what you just said. I mean, Jeff Emmerich, when he took that lead chair, things really started to, rapidly progress, invent this, invent that.
Yeah, yeah. But and also, it should be said, this is the second album that they did in, the same calendar year. They were probably said, you've got, I don't know, X amount of weeks in studio, go in and do it. So, it might have been the songs sound good, let's put it out.
And that's what it was. And that is absolutely the key with the 2 albums per year. Let's get this album out so you can sell it on the road.
Yeah, exactly. And I love the fact that, and I said this on one of the first two episodes. I love the fact that once they hit it with Left Overture, those first three albums eventually all went gold. I love the fact that people went back.
Yeah.
500,000 people went back and discovered each of those albums. So, they're just such rich listening experiences. And what I really like about them, and I love to me, there are very few outwardly poor Kansas albums. Really, there's only a couple that come to mind that are on the bottom of my list. But
Yeah.
I like the fact that you're not distracted listening to the first three albums by any big hit singles.
No. No.
You're just taking them all in as they were. These young guys writing this really complex music and complex, a lot of different moving parts within each of the songs themselves. And Masque is just another part of that. And they're just steadily honing their craft. And I love the fact that when you get into a band like I did with Kansas in the early 90s, and there's this massive catalog waiting to be discovered, so and it makes for a really fun catalog to go back, and it's fun to go back and listen to all of these albums with a really critical ear and listen to them and think, yeah, wow, they really came up with a great batch of songs. So Masque, yeah, it's really a mix of those two sides of Kansas that I think one thing they would do, and you should get better as you go, they got better at combining that commercial side with the prog side. They didn't necessarily have to exist by themselves in separate songs. They got better at it, but what they're presenting here is absolutely fine. And a lot of these songs still make it to set lists. And I think that says a lot about the album.
Oh, totally agree. Yep. And I'm guilty as charged with, once Point of No Return came out, I went backwards and, I had all this, great meat to cut looking back at, oh boy, they have 5 other albums. I'm picking them all up.
Yeah. And on all with these striking covers. About the only, and I don't know, the only thing I can say winding up is that I've never understood, because Song for America introduced the Kansas logo, which is one of my favorite band logos ever, and they did not use it for Masque, and I don't really understand why, because the only thing I can figure is that you're throwing everything against the wall, and in its initial run, Song for America, wasn't successful the way that the record company would call it, so let's try something else. So I don't know, what are your thoughts? It kind of fits using it with this image, this already existing painting, but
I think
I miss the logo whenever it's not there.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Even though the logo was slightly different as than it would turn out when actually, no, the Left Overture version of it was slightly tweaked when it made its return.
They did so. I love they did something different, a little bit different with it each time, but this one they just didn't use it.
Yeah. No, my opinion on this is that at that point, like you said, throwing things up against the wall, that logo was not iconic yet. And like you said, it was an album that did okay, but it didn't light the charts on fire, nor did it garner all this kind of critical praise. And so it was a stepping stone. And so I think there were no emotional ties to that logo at that time. Now you take the fact that Left Overture did what it did, and I think at that point there's no question that you've got to in the 70s, not nowadays, in the 70s you've got to follow up and use that logo again.
It's a brand. Yeah, it's your brand. It's your
For sure.
I mean, I don't know. Were the Rolling Stones the first to use it with the lips? I mean, it's
Yeah, could be. I never
right
thought
logo
about it.
can I mean,
It
and
certainly
that
was
doesn't
big at
even
the
say
time.
anything, and everybody knows what it means.
Yep.
So,
Yep. One of the things I
so there
miss
you
about
go.
the current
That's
state.
our deep. That is our deep dive on the third Kansas album, Masque, 1975. And we're just going to keep going. Steve, thank you for sitting in with me. We're going to be seeing more of Steve. And the deep dive continues, ladies and gentlemen, on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. And we hope you were able to catch all of the episodes.